Hello, welcome to the channel. My name's Thomas. This is Zarbo Audio Projects, and I don't have anything specifically to show you today. I just thought I'd talk for a while. I wanted to actually talk a little bit about how I got into the hobby of speaker building, messing around with radios, amplifiers, stuff like that. And it's not necessarily a very interesting story, but I thought I would just sort of share a few ideas about what brought me to this point. Might be a little interesting for some of you, but for me, building speakers, building radios, stereos, amplifiers, stuff like that, didn't really start with, oh, I want to build something. It really started, and it's probably this way for a lot of us speaker builder guys and hobbyists who do this kind of stuff. It started more as a love of music. And we all have different types of musics that we like, musical styles. I was born in 1971, so I'm pretty much a product of 80s music. I think it's some of the most unique music that there is, but that's because it's the music that was popular and that I was exposed to when I was a teenager. I think that's probably what hits most people when they're growing up, 12, 13, 14 years old up to early mid-20s or somewhere around there. It's probably where they're most influential with their type of music that they've been exposed to. So for me, it was pretty much 80s, but I can remember as a young kid, my father and my mother had this big console. It was, I think it was originally a tube set, and it had a couple of big 12-inch woofers at the bottom on either side, and then it had three, I don't know what they called them, twiddlers, I think is what the term was, mid-range tweeter kind of things. The woofers they had a small magnet, they had an accordion surround. They looked pretty much like a Pro Driver that we would call today, and it had an open back. So they were designed sort of specifically for an open back enclosure. And my dad had replaced it had a record player and it had an amplifier section, and he had replaced the amplifier section with this big old Sears unit that used to have a turntable on top of it. I don't know where he got that from, I never even asked. But he cut a hole in this thing and sort of positioned this thing on an angle, so when you open the top of it up, this stereo system would sort of be jutting out and looking at you. It was kind of neat at the time. Now that stereo had, if I'm not mistaken, it had these slider controls instead of knobs, had bass, treble, and it had buttons and options to pick different inputs and stuff like that. I don't even know who made it. It may have even been Sears. That was so long ago I can't even recall, but it had a lot of power and it was heavy, which probably meant, heavy metal chassis and maybe a great big transformer probably. But I remember it always had a lot of power because we had that thing for a while and we used it to drive a number of different speakers over the years. Well, this thing had a lot of bass, it had a lot of power, it could play loud, and I remember one time when my mother was away, cranking it up. I don't even remember what kind of music I was playing. I don't even remember how old I was. It was probably 12, 13, somewhere around there. And my mom came home and she came inside and I heard the noise. Oh, Mom's home, so I turned the volume down. And she didn't get on my case or anything, but I asked her, I said, "Did you hear the music?" She said, "Yeah, I heard it," as I was pulling in the driveway. So I guess it must have been pretty loud, but that's sort of my first recollection of music being, wow, this is really cool, and liking a little bit of volume and having it cranked up a little bit. That's sort of my first memory. My second memory, which is probably the one, my big wow moment, if you could say that I had one, was when my father gave me a Walkman type radio. It wasn't a Walkman, it wasn't a name brand. It was probably about this big, like you can see how big that is, but maybe 5 inches by 3 3/4 inches or 4 inches, maybe 3/4 to an inch thick. It just played FM. It was stereo, and for the volume, it didn't have like a rotary knob for the volume. It had two slider types, so you could do right and left independently. I always slid them the same because who wants to have this ear louder than this ear? But that's what they had back then. Anyway. He gave this thing to me, and I think it took 2 or 3 AA batteries. I'm pretty sure that's what it was. And it wasn't even a name brand. I don't even remember what brand it was. But and it came with a traditional set of 80s style headphones with the little metal strap and the orange things. And so I remember putting it on and turning it up some, tuning it. It had a light that came on that showed you that it was on, it was on, power indicator. And then as I tuned through the dial, this was probably early 1980s, late 1970s, probably early 80s. Back then, where I lived, southern New Jersey, the FM radio stations were mostly like easy listening kind of stuff. That seems to be what I remember. I know there was a classical station, a few others, but easy listening, Easy 101. That was one of the ones I remember. They made a big deal about the fact that their name didn't start with a W, it started with an E. I remember seeing television commercials for that. Anyway, so I'm listening to something like that, and as I tune it in, I'm hearing mono, a little staticky, and then I tune a little bit more, and then no more static. The full transmission came in perfect, and then that little light came on, that stereo light came on, and then it went from being nice to being, wow, I can hear stuff in this ear that I can't hear in this ear, and I can hear stuff in this ear that I can't hear in this ear. And I remember thinking, wow, this is amazing. Now that console stereo I just mentioned previous, that was stereo, but I mean it was, 5.5 feet wide or whatever it was. There wasn't a lot of stereo separation. But this was the point in time when I had that radio on my head and I heard stereo for the first time, really heard it for the first time. That's when something happened to me. I was a kid. I can't say I made a vow to never again be without stereo, or I can't remember saying, I want to build speakers for the rest of my life now that I heard this. It wasn't nothing like that, but it was one of those points in time where you can say, yeah, all this kind of started with this. So I heard this stereo separation, and I heard the music sound good, and then all of a sudden it was like magic. Boom. There was stuff coming out of this speaker, stuff coming out of this speaker. Some stuff was coming out of both. And you probably remember maybe a similar experience that you had if you're interested in music or audio related, where you had a moment where you said, wow, that really sounds good. You just stop and say, whew. There's been a few moments like that with me for audio. Maybe I'll relay a few of them here, but that was the one that really got me interested in good sound. Yeah, okay, that's a little silly. Cheap little speakers that were probably pretty inferior for way back then. That was the best they had maybe for miniature headphones, but to me, it was like an enlightening moment. So from then on, I knew I always wanted to enjoy and listen to music and have it be good music and have it be music that was reproduced on something that could produce high quality full range stereo. So the console, that got me liking the bass aspect of things, because that had pretty good bass. And this experience with this Walkman style stereo got me interested in the higher fidelity version of music, which was stereo separation, highs sounding high and lows sounding low and everything in between. So that's pretty much what got me interested in a quality type of music. Now, we've always had, all my life as a kid, we've had, record player. My sister had records. She had a stack of 45s. That was the cheapest way to get music, to buy a 45. You throw it on there and they're in a stack. They're all grinding against each other and not high quality. You hear a song you like and, do, that's fine. But I'm talking about this high quality audio experience that you really remember and sticks with you. So that was one of the things that really kind of changed my outlook on music from then on. Well, a few years after that, my father, I guess, sort of saw me eyeing that console, popping the hood, kicking the tires, seeing what's what, looking in the back of it. Because then at that point, I'm sort of interested in, well, I hear all this sound coming from this box. Where's it coming from, So it had an open back. So I looked in there and I saw the big 12-inch woofer, and I saw 3 closed back or like I said, Twiddlers, tweeter mid-range combination speakers. And I remember seeing a little cylindrical metal device, which I believe was probably a capacitor. I don't recall anything else. Like I said, I was young. But I think he saw that and he said to himself, this kid's he's going to take something apart he can't get back together again. So him and I together, he said, well, why don't we take these speakers and put them in boxes and make them a little more portable and easier to move around, and then do away with this big console, because it was big and we didn't really use it for playing records. So that's what we did. He got a couple of boxes, big wooden boxes. They already existed as wooden boxes for something. Can't remember what. But he cut some holes in them. We mounted all the drivers, and that was that. Of course, they never quite sounded right because they were closed back drivers. I don't think they were airtight. The point of doing that, though, was to keep me from totally wrecking that stereo completely and maybe electrocuting myself, which was smart on hitting the microphone, which was smart on Dad's, on his count for that. Who knows what, talk about letting the magic smoke out. I might have burned the house down. It's possible. But at any rate, so we did that, and so that was the first experience I ever had of building a speaker. So I saw that, and I watched my dad using the saber saw and cutting holes out, and I said, oh, so you can take one of these here speaker things, and you can take you a box, and you can cut a hole in that box, and you can get this speaker and shove that speaker in that box, do a couple little screw thingies, and then you got a speaker. Well, there's a little more to it than that, and I know a little bit more about how to design speakers now than then. Sometimes I don't think a whole lot more, but yeah, that was like another one of those moments. Well, a speaker can be built by a human being, such as my dad, or maybe even me. I don't know. I'm a little him. Maybe I'll grow up and be able to do that. Hey, it didn't take long. You all familiar with Radio Shack? If you're not, look into Radio Shack. I know they're not really around anymore. There's a few stores. They went bankrupt, and then, I think they're online. And there is a few stores. There's actually one sort of nearby in Bridgeton. I haven't been there because it's sort of tucked away and isn't really Radio Shack, but it sort of is. But at any rate, Radio Shack was where you went to buy your speakers, because I didn't know of any other way to get raw speaker drivers than to get them from Radio Shack. And at the time, Radio Shack had really nice speakers. The thing was genuine oiled walnut is what a lot of them had on the outside of it, and it was a walnut veneer. It wasn't a super glossy finish. It was kind of matte, but it looked nice. I mean, it wasn't a vinyl sticker. It was actual real wood that had a finish on it, kind of like furniture grade. I have purchased several pairs of those, and I still have a few in my collection all these years later. But Radio Shack was the place where you used to go to buy your speakers. So I, at a young age, 12, 13 years old, something like that, started going to Radio Shack when I would get the opportunity, and I would buy raw speaker drivers, and I would try to make my own speakers. I remember one thing I made. There was a Minimus 7, I think, used a 4-inch woofer. In fact, yeah, I even had a pair. I since gave them to my wife's mother. Minimus 7Ws, which were the walnut grain with the fabric grill, really nice looking, just really small, but like really quality looking speakers. And that used a 4-inch woofer, and those were one of the rare ones Radio Shack would actually sell you that same driver for you to purchase and make a speaker with, that they sold in a pre-made speaker. Usually the speakers you bought from them that were speaker boxes had drivers in them that were frankly a lot better than the ones they would sell you to make your own speakers with. And it was bothered me. They never sold you the real good stuff. I guess they wanted you to build something and then just buy their speakers anyway. I don't know. I shouldn't say that. I don't know what their motivation was. But I do know that the 12-inch woofer you could buy from Radio Shack was not as good as the 12-inch woofer that you could buy in one of their pre-made nice speakers. But anyway, I would go to Radio Shack and I'd buy their speakers, tweeters, and I didn't know what the heck a crossover was. A crossover to me was a capacitor that was soldered on the back of the tweeter that you bought from them. I didn't know about impedance. I didn't know you couldn't stick all the positives and negatives together and have 1.3 ohm impedance speaker and your amps huffing and puffing over there. I didn't know any of that. But I remember taking one of these 4-inch rubber surround woofers, that I bought from Radio Shack, taking two of them, taking a little, I think it was pine, cutting out a little shape, cutting out a couple holes, and wiring up a plug. And then I would take this Walkman that I told you about, and I'd plug that in, and I would have stereo sound on the front of my bike. I mounted this thing on the front of my 10-speed, and I'd be pedaling around. Of course, this little radio had milliwatts of output, not even a watt probably milliwatts. I don't know how many. And these were 4-inch woofers, and as you can imagine, they weren't very efficient. So I had to pedal with my head down like this to try to hear what the music was. It's kind of hilarious. I don't think I left it on there for very long. It was kind of neat. I was proud of it, but it didn't really work. So that was one of my first, failures. You try stuff and it works or doesn't work, and usually it doesn't work. And then you try to figure out another way to make it work. Well, I never did anything more with my bicycle, but that was sort of one of the first things that I made with a Radio Shack speaker. Not too long after that, maybe a year or so, I had purchased some 8-inch full-range speakers from Radio Shack. They were meant to be in a ceiling. They had an 8-inch woofer, and it had an accordion surround, and then it had a whizzer cone, paper whizzer cone in the middle. At any rate, I bought two of those, and I made small cabinets. I had that woofer with a whizzer cone, 4-inch woofer that I had from my previously failed bike experiment, and a piezo tweeter. Radio Shack had a pretty cheap one. It was kind of like, it was sort of squarish but with rounded edges. I think it came with a resistor, not a capacitor, but a resistor. I don't even remember, to be honest with you. But I made a speaker box out of 1/4 inch high density fiberboard that my dad had from something. I cut the panels out with a jigsaw. I drew a straight line and cut on the line with a jigsaw. You can imagine how straight that was. So I built these things, and I used blocking, like 3/4 inch material that I cut to use as blocking for the corners, because 1/4 inch material, when you don't cut it accurately, it has no chance of staying glued together. I didn't caulk it because I didn't know you had to. And so I just stuck all these drivers in there. This 8-inch full range, basically ceiling speaker, 4-inch woofer, whatever the piezo tweeter was, and I stuck them all in there, and I wired all the positives together and all the negatives together because I knew at least that much. And then I connected the amplifier to it, and amazingly enough, it sounded like crap. But I didn't, as a kid, you're like, whoa, it makes noise, and I didn't blow anything up. The fuse didn't blow. I guess this is cool. And it was cool because it actually didn't sound awful. Now, as a kid, a younger person, I know you have more sensitive hearing than as an older person. But as a kid, you're also like looking to get jazzed by an experience like this. So it was great. I'm sure the sound was pretty awful. I'm sure the tweeter was way too hot. I'm sure a lot of things were wrong with it, but I remember liking it, or at least liking something about it. Maybe it was the experience, and I don't remember how long I had them, because remember back then, this was 1981, 2, 3, and a lot of people back then, at least in my neighborhood or where I lived, most of the people I knew, Dad would work and Mom would work at home, so there was one paycheck coming in. Didn't have a lot of money to work with all this kind of stuff, and it's not like it is today, where pretty much anyone can buy. I shouldn't say anyone, but many people can buy pretty much anything they want. The cost per item is a lot lower than it was back then because there's just so many being made. And so I had to reuse things. So these speakers that I made, I actually reused the speakers that I had, the few speakers I had, many times. Those little 4-inch woofers from Radio Shack, I don't know how many different speakers I made with those same woofers. One time I slipped, went through the surround, tore it, put a little piece of black electrical tape over it, and it kept going, and I used those for, I don't know how many speaker builds that I used those things for. But that was sort of the beginning of the building of the speakers for me. So now, fast forward a few years, I'm a teenager, starting to drive. I get a car, and of course, you want a car because I lived out in the country. You had to drive anywhere to get any place you wanted to go, so you needed a car. So that was an important thing for me. And my wife, she hails from New York City. She didn't get her driver's license till she was 29 because she didn't really need it. They take cabs and public transit, but out in the country, you need a car. So I remember buying my first car for $250. I think I overpaid. It was a 1974 Plymouth Duster, and it was an ex-government car, and it was rusted out in the places they normally rust. It was rough, it barely ran. If you blipped the throttle, it would stall out. You had to kind of feather the throttle just a little bit to keep it going. I'm sure a carburetor rebuild would have helped or eliminated that, but when you don't have any money, you know, I guess I didn't know any better. I did some body work on it. It was a good experience, but one of the things that I did do was I put big 10-inch Eminence woofers in the back of this thing. I remember they were Eminence. I didn't know anything about Eminence at the time. They had square magnets, foam surround. They were kind of a thick, heavy paper cone, and they had some bass in that trunk. I had to, of course, enlarge the openings a little bit, and I made these frames, the square frames with sort of trapezoid shape, and in the middle of each speaker frame grill was a Radio Shack ribbon tweeter. So they were 2 ways with a 10-inch woofer with a ribbon tweeter. Now, you use your imagination. You probably don't have to. That's probably going to sound pretty bad. It was very bright. I don't think I patted them down because I don't think I knew how to pat them down, use resistors. So many mistakes were made when you don't know any better. But it was loud, and in the back of a car, loud is sort of what you want, I guess, when you're a kid. So that's my teenage years. And, of course, since then, I've had other cars and stuff like that, but I try to stay away from car audio. But I have built a few subwoofer boxes for the back of cars. I had a 1985 IROC Z28 with T-tops and those cool louvers in the back. And the thing to do back then was, you know, you pop the hatch and you got this big space there at the very back of the car. And it was a perfect size for cutting out a 3/4-inch piece of wood, plopping it in there, and putting a couple of 12-inch woofers. Between the 12-inch woofers and the space behind them and the way the hatchback went, you could get awesome bass out of the crappiest speakers you can think of. So I had a nice little setup back there and a few things like that, but for the most part, I didn't really build too many speakers during the, you know, except for subwoofers, like I said, probably from my 17, 18-year-old range to mid-20s. Mid-late 20s, somewhere around there. I started getting interested in it. I would be interested in it and dabble, but there really wasn't, you know, if I'm not having any success building speakers from Radio Shack, you know, failures and things like that can spur you on, or they can sort of discourage you. I guess it discouraged me a little bit, or I just thought, well, building speakers is something hard. Businesses build speakers, and I'm not going to really be able to get one to sound the way I want it to, because by then I had purchased a few speakers, 3 or 4 sets, one Bose bookshelf speaker and several Radio Shack speakers that actually did sound really nice. And I had gone to stereo stores, and that was one of the things I love to do, go to a stereo store and check out some of their gear. There were some Bose products at the time that were, I remember one Bose speaker that I loved. It was two 10-inch, well, with 10-inch woofer, 10-inch passive radiator, a mid-range, and I think 2 tweeters with these little array things on them. The bookshelf speaker that I had an 8-inch woofer and one of those array, just a lens over a 3-inch tweeter is basically what it was. But those sounded good. But I had been exposed to good quality audio. So at that point, I was buying store-bought speakers to sort of scratch the itch. I had a JVC amplifier that I spent, I think, $500 or somewhere around there on, about within a year or so when I bought my first car. So I spent $250 on my car, $500 on an amplifier for my house, or where I lived. So my priorities were in the right spot anyway. But I didn't build speakers for a long time, and of course I'm living life. I'm going to college. I have a girlfriend. Trying to get a job, doing this, that, and the other. What it was I found these people. Parts Express.
What?